Hey everyone, this is Ashley Ellenboss with Skyhouse Herb School and Apothecary, and today we'll be talking about cannabis, the good, the bad, and the ugly from an herbalist's perspective. Now, this is a topic that's come up a lot lately through just discussions with friends, family. I've gotten some people reaching out to me. I think, over the holiday season, things get more stressful and also things become clearer, in terms of our habits. So I want to talk about cannabis. I want to talk about its history, why it might be helpful, why it might be harmful. And then if you are finding yourself maybe taking it or using it more than you'd like to and you're having a hard time stopping, I'm going to give you some ideas for ways to help you wean off of cannabis. So let's start off by talking about my retreat that's coming up. So, if you would like to join us, I will be co teaching a wonderful retreat, a women's retreat in sunny Costa Rica in April with Rukmini Walker and a number of other lovely practitioners. So, if you want to learn more, please click on the description. There are still a few spaces available. So, I hope you can join us. Also, if you like my channel and you haven't subscribed, please do that. Please click, click, click. And please also hit the like button if this is helpful content to you. All right. So, cannabis. Cannabis has a long history of use. And it's interesting because when we look at the history of use, it really started off more as a fiber. Hemp is one of the strongest natural fibers. So it was used in making clothing, making ropes, and medicinally and internally, it's also been used for thousands of years. Its origin is in Central and Western Asia. And this is where we see the first use of cannabis. And then we see it arriving, or, I don't know how it arrived in India or if it naturally grew there, but we start to see the use of it then popping up in India, in Egypt, and then later in Greece. So it does have a long history of use and specific use, and it's not being used in the way that it is often being consumed today. So I want to just clarify a few things that yes, this is an old plant. Yes, it was used medicinally, but let me tell you about how it was used medicinally. So in India, it was believed to have been a plant given to the people by Shiva, who is the god of destruction and the god of death, which in the Hindu pantheon is an important part of the life cycle. And so people who took on a spiritual relationship with Shiva would smoke it spiritually to gain it was thought that if you dedicate your life, you basically become a hermit and dedicate your life to Lord Shiva and you smoke cannabis, it pleases him and then he'll give you insight. These people were not people of the world. They did not have kids and jobs and try to do, drive vehicles. They lived out in the mountains or in the caves and in the forests, meditating under the influence of this plant for spiritual guidance and direction. So that's very different than taking it recreationally. Now, in Asia, we see it being used for things like convulsions. And it was actually not smoked. It was the root that was used. This was also the way that it was used in ancient Greek medicine. So Pliny the Elder, who I wrote down 27 to 79 AD, he used a decoction of the roots for arthritis and gout. So these are the roots boiled. Okay. That's very, very different. And in China, they also used, they would make a tea, and they also would use the roots for use as an anti-inflammatory and an antispasmodic. So there's not a long history of use of smoking this plant for medicinal value. It's interesting when we look back to Galen, who we can think of him as the father of Greek medicine. He writes in one of his books that he was commenting on cannabis, and this was in one of his books on foodstuffs. And he says that in Italy, cannabis seeds were cooked into desserts so that, at parties, usually among the more elite class, people would eat these seeds in these pastries or desserts, and they would become merry. It was part of a social experience. Also in Italy, they would give the little flowers, so the female flowers with the seeds in them, on a little dish and hand these out as like a post-meal refreshment at social gatherings. And it was considered to be a very, very good, polite. It was very polite to serve these little treats at a social gathering. But he did not, he said that there is a tendency towards debauchery and poor behavior and lack of discrimination after ingesting this plant. So it was not advised, by Galen. Now, in Egypt, we see use of this plant being used in tombs, being thought of as a plant to help in the afterlife. Also, it was used, again, topically mostly for arthritis and for pain, but not smoked. So, you know, we're in different realms here. Now, what are the good and positive benefits of using cannabis? And there's a lot of research now on THC, the endocannabinoid system. We actually have endogenous cannabis receptors in our body that we make our own cannabinoids. We make a compound called anandamide, or the bliss molecule, that gives us this feeling of euphoria. And it happens that cannabis also creates its own cannabinoids that plug these receptors that give us a feeling of euphoria. So, it just because something's natural doesn't necessarily mean it's good, because what ends up happening is, as we push these receptors, we create a dependency on the substance to give us the feeling of euphoria. And studies have been shown. There was a recent study in February 2022 from the National Academies of Science. They did a very large review, and they found that cannabis use actually drives the increased risk of abusing and becoming dependent upon cannabis and other substances. And I know there's out there in the social world, a lot of people say, oh, cannabis isn't addictive, there's no withdrawal. But that's actually not true anymore. That maybe was true before we had the science. But the science is now saying, yes, there is an increased risk of becoming dependent on cannabis and having withdrawal symptoms such as irritability, mood swings, depression, anxiety, appetite changes. So this is a medicine, right? And just like any plant, it can be used medicinally and therapeutically, and it can be abused. Now, do I ever recommend people to take cannabis in my herbal practice? I don't. I do recommend CBD, where the THC is removed. And I do find that that can be very helpful for things like sleep, chronic inflammation, anxiety. But I don't recommend cannabis because it's a strong medicine. I mean, it's one of those plant spirits to me that has a very loud voice, and not everyone's psyche can handle it. And I wanted to share too that something that one of my teachers, David Winston, shared. I was on an herb walk with him in Asheville, North Carolina. This must have been in 2000 and maybe 6 or 7. And he was talking about the Cherokee people, whom he is a part of. He talks about how in the Cherokee see cannabis as a trickster. So he said, they really keep an eye on it and keep a distance from cannabis. He said this one thing that I never forgot. He said, cannabis makes you think you're moving forward when you're really standing still. So think about that. If you've ever tried cannabis, you have all these ideas, all these plans. You think you're making progress, but you're actually not making any progress at all. You're actually standing still. Now, if you're out in a cave meditating and contemplating the deeper, meanings of life, and you're approaching the plant spirit in a mode of receptivity, then I do think it can be helpful. But most of us that use cannabis are on our phones, we're watching movies, we're out in the world, we're socializing. We're not taking it for deep spiritual downloads. So, as a trickster medicine, don't be surprised if it actually takes you away from the things you love, and it actually steals your joy and keeps you from doing the things that you actually want to do. I mean, that's one of the downsides of regular cannabis use, is it severely impacts motivation and drive. So, you want to be very, very careful with this plant, because the plant, plant spirits can overtake your spirit. They can overtake your psyche. Coffee does this to a lot of people. You feel like, they say in America, the slogan for Dunkin' Donuts is America runs on Dunkin'. And I feel like in the American psyche, coffee has taken over our psyche in some ways. So we want to drink more and more and more and go faster, 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 right? Get more and more focused, achieve more and more and more. But, in some ways, that's not us. That's the plant talking. And if you've ever taken things like ayahuasca or mushrooms or, some of these other entheogens, they are steering the ship. Your psyche is no longer in control. The plants are in control, and cannabis will take over your psyche and it will lie to you and tell you that you need it. And it will create this dependency. So what do we do? What do we do to help ourselves if you find that you're stuck in this loop of dependence upon cannabis? First, you just have a conversation with the plant. And however you do that in your life. But, for me, I might sit down. If I had some of the plant in front of me, I would say, hello, I'm Ashley. We've been, cohabitating together. You've been in my body a lot. And I want to thank you for what you've revealed. I want to thank you for the medicine, for the relaxation. I want to thank you for the clarity you gave me in X, Y, and Z. Maybe even write a letter to cannabis and just thank it. Thank it for what it's given you. But then say to the plant too, I am no longer feeling like this relationship is a positive one. I am starting to feel like this is a one-sided deal, and I'm starting to not like who I am in this relationship with you. So I would like to break up. Maybe not forever. And because we never, I never like to say forever, forever. And plants appreciate that. Just say for right now, because that's what a boundary is. A boundary is something you create in the moment for the moment. It's not a forever thing. So in this moment, I am feeling like I need a break from you. I am going to take the rest of you and bury you in the garden or sprinkle you in the water or whatever else you want to do to give the rest of the plant away in a respectful way. And I am going to take in other plants to help me find my center. And so by doing that and creating that, making a statement, creating a game plan, will help you switch gears. Now, if you feel like that's a little too drastic, or you're feeling like you want to step before that, before like completely cutting cannabis out, here are some things that I've done with clients who've had cannabis addiction in the past, is I'll have them mix in other herbs if they smoke. So if they're smoking cannabis, I'll have them mix in a little bit of mugwort, a little bit of damiana, maybe a little bit of lavender, but it can be strong. So just a pinch of these dried plants, and mix that into your smoking blend. So you're introducing other plant spirits into the cannabis. It will mellow it out. It'll create a little bit more of a complex conversation when you smoke it. So it'll be easier for that cloying kind of sticky trickster energy of cannabis to kind of let go of a little bit. And you're giving your psyche some new conversations, some new ideas to work with. And then slowly by slowly, over time, until all the cannabis, you add more and more of the other herbs until you're not smoking any more of the cannabis. Now, if you're not smoking cannabis and you're taking it in form of edibles, or there's a lot of other ways, vaping, I guess, maybe, but if you're taking cannabis in another form, you can also, and you're feeling like you can't just stop, maybe if you're doing gummies, for example, you'll go out and buy a tincture of valerian root. This is a really nice one that has, I would say, sort of similar euphoric and relaxing qualities, kind of hypnotic. Hops is another one that's hypnotic. So you could maybe buy a blend of hops and valerian. Hops would be the strobiles in a tincture, and then valerian would be the root. And maybe you mix these two together, and maybe you take like 5 milliliters of that blend, maybe 2.5 milliliters of each herb. You take it as a little shot. You take half your gummy. You just take a minute to sit and say, okay, plants, we're going to get along. And I just need a little bit of help from you, valerian and hops, to help me find my way through my relationship with cannabis. And then you do that. You work with those other plants. You can also take hops and valerian in a powdered form as a capsule. If you can't find a tincture, you can try that. Maybe taking 2 capsules of each. Usually each capsule has like 50 grams or 25 grams, depending on the size, but that should be sufficient. And then at night before bed, I strongly recommend you take something to help you sleep. And I have a favorite blend called, what is it? Wakeful Days, Sleepy Nights. And I'll post a link to that. I don't have any affiliation with them, but I use it for me and I've used it for clients. It works very, very well. You have to take high amounts though if you want it to work, guys. So you can't just do one squirt, but you've got to take like, a good 10 milliliters or like 15 squirts. So you can read that on the label, but I'll include that for you. But that can be it has valerian, it has hops, it has skullcap, has a bunch of herbs that are really helpful in giving you that euphoric, gently relaxed state of mind, without dampening some of the other parts of the psyche. Another thing that I think is really helpful while you are coming off of using cannabis is milky oat tops. So this is a specific thing. You'll probably have to buy it unless you have milky oat tops growing and you can tincture it yourself right away because the medicine doesn't dry. You have to actually extract it while the oats are in that milky stage. So I really like 4-element herbals. You can also buy milky oat tops from herbalists and alchemists. I'll include some links in the description, but that would be a really nice thing to do as soon as you realize, I think my nervous system needs a break. I think my psyche needs a break. And again, you'll want to dose it higher. I'll give you a dosage range in the description, but 10 mils a day to start to repair some of the frayed wires that happen over a long period of cannabis use. And then, I think other things that you can do is because THC is stored in the fat cells of your body, it will take months for the THC to completely find its way out of your system. So maybe you want to increase your water intake, maybe start taking a fiber supplement because that will also help to bind some of the THC and move it out. So like something like Metamucil or flaxseed or psyllium husk, things like that would be really helpful. Eating more beans and legumes, so it's really high in fiber, more vegetables as well. Taking B vitamins, a B complex would be a good idea to help restore and balance brain chemistry after long use. Those are just some things that I think would be very helpful. So overall, again, I think the takeaway here is that cannabis is a plant. It has a spirit, just like every other plant spirit. It can be helpful in some cases. If you're really, if you want to go into a spiritual ceremony with the plant and create a sacred space with music, lights, and again, this is not something you would do every day, but, if you want to create a sacred space for spiritual work, you can use cannabis in that way. That's a great way to use this plant on, not on a regular basis, right? Maybe once every few months, ceremoniously. That's a respectful way. That's a good way to use this plant. Um, you know, Again, CBD, wonderful medicine without the THC. And I know there's a lot of people out there that love THC. They sing its praises. And I'm just not one of those herbalists. I think it works for some people. And I've met some people where cannabis is like a plant that works very well for them, but I've met more people where cannabis becomes problematic, especially for younger people. They did a study where they looked at, I just want to pull this study up for you. It was really interesting. They were looking at the spiritual uses of people using cannabis in a spiritual. So it was spiritual benefit from cannabis. This was from the Journal of Psychoactive Drugs, April to June 2022. And it says, like many mind-altering plants, cannabis has been part of spiritual practices for thousands of years. It has deep roots in Hinduism, Islam, Rastafarianism, and indigenous traditions in Asia, Africa, and elsewhere. Yet almost no attention has been given to how contemporary adults employ it spiritually. A sample of 1,087 participants' mean age was 38.9 years old, completed an online survey assessing their use of cannabis and other substances, as well as spiritual and psychological characteristics. Spiritual benefit from cannabis was reported by 66.1% of the sample. 5.5% reported it had sometimes been a spiritual hindrance. That's interesting to note. A Manova study showed that those who reported a spiritual benefit differed significantly from those who did not on several outcome variables. And a post hoc descriptive discriminant analysis revealed that expansiveness, motivation, non theistic daily spiritual experience, meditation frequency, and two mindfulness facets contributed most to differentiating the two groups. The majority of the sample, 63%, was free of cannabis use disorder. So they're saying of these 1,000 people that the ones who had a spiritual, who reported a spiritual benefit, that they were free of cannabis use disorder, which meant that they did not feel, they were shown to not have an addiction to cannabis compared to disordered groups. The non-disordered group was significantly older and scored lower on experiential avoidance, psychological distress, and several motives for use. Results suggest that spiritual motives for cannabis use may be widespread. But here's the thing, again, they're saying that people who had non-disordered use of cannabis, that they were not addicted, they were older in age, they reported higher spiritual benefit, whereas people who were younger in age and who used it more for, they scored lower, or sorry, if they scored higher on experiential avoidance, so they were using cannabis to avoid certain experiences or certain psychological states, they also scored higher on physiological stress, and they showed yeah, I think that's the biggest one, is this experiential avoidance. So people that use cannabis to avoid certain things, they received less spiritual value. So you can't have both. And so again, to my younger audience who's listening, I would say, you're at higher risk for becoming addicted to this plant and having this plant, take over your psyche. Again, think of it kind of like hijacking your mind and your own psyche and your own physiology. And if you're older and you use it sparingly and you use it for more spiritual benefit, your psyche is probably more developed and intact. And so you will probably have a different experience in using this plant, especially if your motive is spiritual enhancement. So with that, I will thank you for listening. Please subscribe. Please like this video if it was helpful. Please share it if you think other people might benefit from hearing this information. And I thank you all for listening. I wish you all a wonderful rest of your day.